Are you at a point in your career where you've been presented the option or asked about the possibility of, or maybe you've been actively seeking a management or leadership position? Well, in this video, we're going to dive into the things that you need to know before you decide whether or not you should manage people. Welcome back to the Rebase Show. I am your host, Sean P. Martin, and this is the show that is all about profession with purpose. And today we're going to talk about people management. It is a topic that I think is thrown around a lot, and a lot of people like to talk about what a good leader looks like, or whether or not they should do different things as a manager, or whether or not they should become a manager, or what managers are doing right and wrong. And yet, oftentimes, people are struggling with this decision on whether or not they should move from being an associate, an individual contributor, and whether or not they should dive into taking on a role where they actually manage other people and are responsible for these other people. And sometimes people just dive right into a management role because they want to move up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and they don't stop to consider all of the different factors that go into becoming a manager. It is not something that I believe should be taken lightly. And fortunately enough, not too long ago, somebody that I know and trust and respect a lot came to me, and they came to me with this question. They had an opportunity to move into a management position, and he wasn't really sure whether or not that was a decision that he should say yes to, and wasn't really sure if it was going to be the right thing for him, and actually came through with a lot of really thoughtful, really interesting questions. So what you're going to get a lot of in this episode are my answers to those questions, because I sort of fell into many of the leadership positions, leadership roles, and management titles that I've had over my career. And I don't take any of that lightly. And for anybody who's actively considering whether or not they should make this shift, this episode is going to be really, really valuable to you, because I don't take this decision lightly. Like I said, I sort of fell into this and just kind of said yes to a lot of things. And I want everybody who's been weighing, or might in the future be weighing, whether or not they should jump into management to really be thoughtful about this decision, because it is a significant decision for a number of reasons. So what you're going to get in everything that follows here is a handful of really thoughtful questions about moving into a management role, and my answer to those questions based on my now years of experience in being a terrible leader, getting better, being a pretty awful manager, getting better, holding myself to a super high standard as a people manager and as a leader, and everything that I see now that I look back on my progression. And while I certainly am far from perfect now, I do believe and I'm confident that I am a much better leader than the vast majority of people out there in leadership and management positions. And it's because I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. And there are a lot of things I didn't know starting out that I hope now I can help you to know and understand before you decide whether or not to pull that trigger. Sound good? All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in with the first question. What is the most important thing to consider when thinking about whether or not you should be a manager? I thought long and hard about this one because it's a great question. And I realized that the most important question to ask yourself if you're about to potentially become a manager is whether or not can you find fulfillment in improving the lives and the careers of other people. Is that a strong enough why and motivator for this shift to make sense for you? And I say shift because it is a massive shift in responsibilities, in how success is determined, whether or not you are successful in your role as an employee. Now your success is contingent upon and really based upon the success of other people that you manage. And it's less so contingent upon your individual performance. And so if you can find fulfillment in helping others achieve their goals and helping others to improve their skill sets and improve their performance and to really deliver value, then maybe becoming a manager is right for you. But again, I say that it's a shift, and I want you to understand that this is not necessarily going to be a smooth transition for you. And for some people are natural born leaders, natural born managers, and they will just thrive when they jump into a management role. But for somebody like me, not quite a smooth transition. Maybe it's because I was an engineer. Maybe it's because of the way my brain works. I don't really know. But I do know that leadership and management did not come naturally to me. And I had to even seek out to figure out what are the skills that I don't have that I need to develop. I needed to even identify those first before I could go and try to build that skill set. And granted, I was inclined to do that because I don't really like sucking at things. And if I'm going to do something, I'm going to make sure that I'm at least pretty good at it. And maybe that's just my internal competitive nature. But I knew that when I became a manager, I don't want to just be like a phone it in garbage manager. I wanted to be really good at it. And it was not an easy transition. And I had to honestly figure out what I didn't know and what skills I didn't have and find people to model and all these other things. And I had to figure that out before I could even get on the path to learning about those skills, to putting things into practice, to trying to actually get better at those things. So if you're not ready for a rocky transition, potentially, then maybe you should reconsider. But I will say that it is extremely fulfilling to be in a management and a leadership position, and I'll get into that a little bit deeper later. But just understand that it is not a smooth and simple transition always, and you may be starting out in a place where you're not quite as good at these new skills and at these new things as you were in your previous role. The next question, what's the most rewarding part about being a manager? And then I guess it's a two-part question, because the next part is, what is the most challenging thing? So let's tackle these separately. What is the most rewarding thing about being a manager? Honestly, the most rewarding thing for me, and getting leadership opportunities happened at a time in my life when I really started to value other people more than just my own selfish self. I was in my mid to late 20s, and I was coming around and realizing that I couldn't accomplish everything myself. I was maturing finally as a adult, quote unquote, human being. And I loved working in this team dynamic. And my first leadership opportunities came before my first people management opportunities. And honestly, in a leadership role and in a management role, watching people and teams come together and accomplish things that are challenging, that are complex, daunting even, that is the most rewarding thing for me, is watching people come together and work together and solve big problems. You know, granted, I am a huge softie despite my gruff exterior, but the single most rewarding thing for me is every single person who's ever thanked me for mentoring them, for showing them a new perspective or a new way of looking at things, or a new way of dealing with somebody else's behavior, or how to get along with somebody, or anybody's ever thanked me for coaching them through a tough time, for giving them the tools and the space for them to grow and thrive. Every single time I've received appreciation for that. And I certainly don't obsess about leadership the way that I do now for the appreciation. But damn it if it doesn't feel great. And it can be kind of like a drug, but every single time I receive that appreciation from somebody, it's like a drug. And it's every single piece of appreciation, that knowing that somebody has gotten better in their career, somebody has advanced their career, they've been more successful, they've been more fulfilled. Each and every single occurrence of that is worth more to me than the years and years, all of the years and years that I ever spent writing, publishing, and releasing code. And I love writing and publishing and releasing code. And every single person who I've impacted each one of them is worth more than that, all combined, like, without a doubt. Nothing, honestly, that I've ever created in code is as memorable to me as a single person that I've managed, that I've led, or that I've mentored, who's changed for the better or improved or achieved some dream or goal of theirs. And that is by far the most rewarding part of being a manager. And so if that is something that interests you, then you might be on the right track. So that said, that all sounds wonderful. Unicorns, rainbows, puppies, everything's magical. The second part of that question, what is the most challenging part of being a manager, is, and again, maybe this is my engineer brain coming through, but people are messy and complicated. And managing is hard. It is not easy. I am not a parent, but sometimes I feel like managing and trying to lead people is often like being a parent, because you have this drive to want to do everything perfectly and never screw up, especially if you are a recovering perfectionist like myself. You eventually will come to accept that, yeah, you're going to make a bunch of mistakes because you're not going to do everything perfectly. So you're going to do some things right, you're going to do some things wrong, and you just have to take both as they come. You have to understand and admit to yourself that when you make a mistake as an associate level employee or an individual contributor, generally speaking, making that mistake, the impact is going to be lesser. It's not going to be quite as impactful whenever you make a mistake, you screw something up, you overlook something. Depending on the nature of the mistake that you make as a manager or somebody in a leadership position, the impact can be much larger. There can be more downstream impact. You're impacting people now and not just, the thing that you are working on as an individual contributor. And that means that you have more responsibility. And it means that with great power comes great responsibility, honestly. And it sounds silly and very Spider-Man for me to say that, but it's very true, which means that you really just have to make sure that you take it seriously. And that by being in a management or a leadership position, that you're not just taking things for granted, and that you have people's careers and their livelihoods and their lives and their emotional health that you're not necessarily responsible for, but that you can influence and impact. And so it just means taking it seriously and knowing that things aren't going to be perfect. So you might have to course correct. You might have to apologize for things. You might have to, clean up your mess, so to speak, whenever those mistakes do happen. And what that really means, end of the day, is that as a leader, as a manager, you have to truly develop some strong resilience to being imperfect, to making mistakes. You have to develop enough humility to be able to admit to yourself and to others whenever you do screw up, whenever you overlooked somebody's review, whenever you gave feedback in a manner that wasn't well received, whenever you missed some key important things that you should have mentioned to somebody about their performance, about how they could have done something better, or when you weren't timely about giving feedback, like all of these types of examples, you have to develop the humility to be able to say, yep, I screwed up there. I apologize, because you now have people who, again, whose emotional states are impacted and influenced by the things that you do. So again, it's not that unlike being a parent. And one other thing that's challenging that really is going to depend on the company that you work for, the environment that you work in, is that you may get into a management role and you may not get a lot of external support. Most companies, especially, so I specialize a lot in working with small companies, companies less than, say, 200 people, but as small as 10 people or less. A lot of times companies will put somebody into a management role, and for whatever reason, it's inexplicable to me that this happens, but it happens all the time. They put people in a management role and they basically will throw you in the deep end and expect you to figure all of this shit out all on your own. I was fortunate that I've had some really good mentors over my time, and that I've had people who have taught me about things that maybe are obvious to some people, but not as obvious to me. One great example, when I first started managing people, like from an HR people manager perspective, I was managing some interns and eventually managing some junior developers. And my boss at the time told me, when you go for one-on-ones with these people, you go for coffee or whatever, build rapport with them and see how they're doing, get to know them, get to know, what's going on in their life, their spouse, their girlfriend, boyfriend, do they have kids, like what's going on in their life. Don't just dive right into the status update on what it is that they're doing. And again, maybe I'm just a programmer idiot and I didn't get it at the time, but I was like, oh, that's really good advice, that I should relate to people as human beings and not just let's go for a one-on-one. How are things going? Check, 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 check. What do you need? Check, check, check. Okay, let's go back to work. Those sorts of things were invaluable to me. And honestly, they led to me becoming a better manager much sooner than I probably would have if I had not had that advice. So just know that depending on the environment you're in, you may get thrown in the deep end and you may not have a lot of guidance. There may not be anybody in your organization, in your company, who is a great manager or leader who can give you guidance. If you've got them, great. If not, seek somebody out who can actually give you that guidance, because becoming a good manager and a good leader is no different than developing the skills to get good at inside sales, or the skills to be a good software engineer, or a good digital marketer, or a good teacher, or a good whatever. As I mentioned before, this is a new set of skills that you have to develop. And they don't just come naturally to most people. Some people they do. You might be one of those lucky ones. But if it doesn't come naturally, then you really do need to find some way to learn and practice and develop those skills. And I want to throw in one last little note here. I think a lot of times the assumption is made by people, and it was probably made by me back in the day when I started managing engineers. I figured, well, I know what it's like to be an engineer, therefore I can manage engineers because that'll be super easy. I know what their job is like. Just because you might know a lot about the job, the day-to-day of the person that you're managing, does not mean that you're going to be good at managing those people. It's not that simple. So just because you're familiar with that type of job and that discipline or that industry doesn't mean that you're just naturally going to be a great leader. So keep that in mind as well. Next question was, what were your expectations moving into a manager role. And how does reality differ from that? I kind of spoke to this earlier when I said that I kind of fell into some of my leadership opportunities and some of my management roles. And I honestly wasn't sure. I'm not sure what I knew to expect at all. I think a part of me expected that managing a handful of engineers was just going to be another thing that I did in addition to, at the time I was still an engineer. This is the way that our organization worked, where I'd still write code, I'd still lead teams, and then I'd also manage some people. So it wasn't like a full-time thing. And I guess I just figured it was going to be another set of responsibilities, and that if I just kind of phoned it in, it'd probably be easy, and I knew it might be hard, but I didn't really know how difficult it could potentially be. And so I was in this sort of player coach model where I was still actively, working as an engineer, but also leading a team and also then managing a few people. And so I knew I'd be writing code a little bit less because there's only so much time in the day. Therefore, I would have to do some managing and have to spend some time on that. But I didn't really know in that sort of player coach model how much less time I would actually be spending coding, especially as I split my time really 3 ways, coder, engineer, team lead, and also people manager. And I didn't realize that trying to juggle all 3 of those was going to be a bigger challenge than I thought it was going to be. And that what would suffer probably the most was going to be the actual coding part and maintaining my foothold in that individual contributor capacity. And, eventually the more people that I ended up managing and the more those responsibilities became, because I realized, again, after not long being a manager, that I wasn't really good at it and I needed to get better. As I was trying to be a better manager to people, the more involved those responsibilities became, the less and less I was doing the other things. And it was at that point really that I realized that being a good manager to even, a half dozen people can really in and of itself be a full-time job. And that if I was going to continue to do that and I wanted to do it well, that I would have to basically let go of those other aspects of the player coach model that I had been in, the coding and everything. So yeah, I think my expectations were that it was going to be a little bit easier than it was, a little bit less involved and a little bit less time consuming than it was. And it really turned into a thing that for my perspective and my desire to do it well, it ended up taking a lot more of my time than I thought it would. The good news is I kind of fell in love with this whole concept of what I mentioned earlier about helping other people to achieve great things in their career. And so that made it a very easy transition for me eventually. And it made it easier to let go of those things I had to let go of. The next question, how do you develop your skills as a manager or as a leader? And I hope that this will resonate with some people, but it may not. Honestly, with an engineering background, I have this mindset and I take the approach of learn something, then apply it. Then learn from that, then apply it again. Because learning things as an engineer all the way from the time way back when I was 12 and learning how to code, reading something in a book and understanding it is different than actually applying it and seeing it in action. And so developing leadership skills for me to be the best manager I could be was a lot like becoming a better engineer over the years. It was just a constant practice and wanting to constantly just absorb and consume as much as I could and see how it would work and play with the other things that I'd already learned and the other things that I had practiced. Fortunately, you do get to start out in this realm as a manager. In a lot of cases, if you get promoted into a manager role, for example, you start out a little more relatable and a little more respected by people, given the years of experience that you kind of already have in whatever industry it is that you've developed those skills in. So if you were a great salesman, you become a sales manager, people generally will respect you more because you were good at sales, right? If you move into an engineering manager role, people will have a baseline of respect for you because you were a good engineer, right? So you do start out with a little bit of a baseline reputation, which is nice to have. And you just have to, again, take that mindset of, I've got a baseline reputation. I've got things I know I need to learn. So I need to learn and apply, and just continually be evolving, and not think that just because you now are in a management position that you've made it. This is not the end of the road. This is not where you get off. This is not where you stop learning and growing and evolving. This is the beginning, just the beginning of where you really start to learn and grow and evolve and dramatically increase your potential impact on other people and your impact on the business. Now, I will say that in developing my skills as a manager, as a leader, one mistake I've definitely made multiple times in the past, maybe even the recent past, is in trying to consume as much information, as much knowledge as possible, and just constantly reading books, watching YouTube videos, taking courses, and just constantly consuming as much as I can, but then not applying much or any of it. And I feel like you have to take this approach of actually applying what it is that you're learning and seeing it in action to determine if it's something you can use, if it's something that fits your style and your approach, if it's something that you can understand, whether it's working or not. And I honestly feel like there are so many great frameworks and styles and systems for leadership and for management out there that you might learn about one and apply it and try some things and realize that it's not for you. But inevitably you will find the things that will work for you and do fit in with your personality and your unique style and those things. But you can't just consume as much as possible and not apply any of it, because then you're just going to set yourself back weeks or months. And you're way better off if you actually learn something, say, that's really interesting and really valuable. I'm going to try that the next time I have a one-on-one with this person because of this reason, and just apply that then and just kind of observe what happens and determine if it feels good, if it feels like something you could improve in, if it feels like something you could try again. And that is the best way to develop your skills, is through practice and through application of what it is that you're learning. The next question is a question that is hard to answer. And the next question was, what resources, books, blogs, courses, etc., are the most useful for somebody looking to be in a management role? And there are so many. I could turn the camera around right now and show you my bookshelves, which probably 20% of these books are on leadership or emotional intelligence or management or human behavior or influence or philosophy, or like all of these things that are books that I've bought, let alone the podcasts, the course, all these other things that I've consumed rapidly in order to try to better understand people so that I could better lead the people that I've been charged with leading. And I say that to say, my recommendations may not be the recommendations that resonate with you, but I will give you a handful and I will explain why they're so meaningful and powerful to me. The number one resource that I would recommend to anybody who's interested in being in a leadership position, and I'm going to grab it here in a second, so this is going to be a little awkward if you're watching this on video. Probably won't edit this out. And I also have to find the book. 1 second. That resource is Extreme Ownership, which is a book by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who, first of all, Jocko Willink has an amazing podcast called Jocko Podcast, and I love the simplicity in that name. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin in the 90s and the early 2000s essentially rebuilt the Navy SEAL leadership training program from the ground up. And this book, Extreme Ownership, is fantastic because it has principles that are outlined and explained through battle scenarios, real battle scenarios that happen in Ramadi when Jocko and Leif and their teams were in Ramadi back during the Iraq War. And they also have these principles and these ideas explained in real business scenarios through the companies that their consulting company, Echelon Front, works with in order to really up-level the leadership of those organizations. And the very shortened version of Extreme Ownership is essentially that responsibility floats uphill, and it's always the next person's fault if something fails. And if something fails, it's not just that person's fault, but it's their manager's fault, and it's their superior's fault, and it's their superior's fault. And that it's not about passing blame down to the boots on the ground. It's about taking responsibility and taking ownership of failures at a management level, at an executive level, at a senior leadership level, and determining, okay, we failed. Now what do we do? And I don't know, maybe it's just something in my personality, but I love that idea that if people failed, whether they failed in a little way or whether they failed spectacularly, it's got to be because there's something I didn't do to help them, or some information I didn't provide them, or some context that they needed, or some course correction that I could have helped them with. And so that book really helped to shift my mindset on what good leaders do. They don't pass the buck. They don't blame other people. They don't find scapegoats. They take responsibility, and then we get better, and we do it better the next time. And when I think about management, when I think about leading teams, I can't think about any better example of high-performing elite teams than folks like the Navy SEALs. And sure, maybe I'm a bit of a alpha bro dude, and so therefore I relate a little more strongly with the military metaphor. But if you want to manage people and you want to lead teams that do great things and do them well consistently, I can't think of a better example than following the lead of the people who rebuilt Navy SEAL leadership training. So Extreme Ownership, highly recommend it. I have gifted this book to many leaders in various organizations that I've been involved with over the past several years, and it's fantastic. The other resource that I would recommend, especially for somebody who's looking to get into a management or leadership role for the first time, is looking up the 6 human needs. And you might Google Tony Robbins' 6 human needs. Now, again, my brain works differently than some people's brains. I'm an engineer. I like having systems and patterns and rules and models that I can overlay people's behavior and I can overlay things onto so that I can better understand them. And about 5-6 years ago, got my first exposure to being at a Tony Robbins event, and he talked about the fundamental 6 human needs. And I'll go through them really quickly, but I don't want to go into great detail because I can't do them justice the way that he can. But the idea of these 6 human needs is that every single thing anybody does, they do so in order to meet one or more fundamental human needs, and there are 6 of them. And we all have these needs, we all attempt to meet these needs, and we all do so in a variety of different ways. And so those 6 human needs are the need for certainty. We have the need to feel uncertainty or variety. We all have the need to feel significant. We all have the need to feel connection and going deeper than connection, love. we all have the need to feel growth. And we all have a need for contribution. And so I would recommend that you look up these 6 needs, that you pattern them into your brain, because again, when you are managing people or leading people, they're going to behave in ways that you don't expect them to behave. They're going to respond to emails that you send them in weird ways. They're going to do things that you're curious about why they would do that when I asked them to do the other thing. And just getting a basic understanding of these 6 human needs and of human needs psychology will help you to understand the system that is a human being, the complex, confusing, often illogical system that is a human being, the person that you're managing. And having a baseline understanding of these needs will help you to at least start to brainstorm and think about, okay, well, maybe they didn't do the thing that I asked them to do and they did this other thing instead because they needed to feel a sense of variety, because they got sick of working on the same thing over and over again, so they did this other thing. Or maybe this other thing that they did instead of what I asked them to do was going to get them a little bit of recognition, so they wanted to feel significant. And just having a baseline sense of that will, I think, help you to understand people and human behavior a little bit better. Even though it won't be a silver bullet and it won't solve every problem, I think it'll help you a ton. So those really are the 2 biggest resources that I would recommend to anybody: extreme ownership to get a sense of the principles of good leadership, and then the 6 human needs to understand why it is that we all do what we do. Okay, so that was it. We covered all of the core questions around why you should or shouldn't get into a management position, and what my thoughts were on whether or not you should jump into a management role. And there are a ton more questions we could potentially cover, and I wanted to make sure that you got a ton of value out of this and I wasn't just answering every question under the sun, because inevitably the one question I didn't actually cover in this episode that was asked of me was, would you recommend making the transition? And I can't make that decision for anybody else, honestly. It has to be your call. But I hope what I've given you today will help you to more easily make that decision for yourself. That said, I will tell you that while I can't make this decision for anybody else, I would advise, if you've got the opportunity, I would advise for you to consider it if you want to apply whatever analytical or creative or problem-solving skill set that you've developed in your life and in your career. If you want to apply those skills to an entirely foreign, entirely unknown, entirely new area, then you might consider it. You might consider it if you are patient enough to work in a situation where you can actually create broader and deeper and more meaningful impact. But creating that broader, deeper, more meaningful impact might take weeks, it might take months, or it might take years to actually come to fruition. This is something that I struggle with a lot. Being a software engineer, I can see the results of my work almost immediately. Being a manager, you gotta wait and see if things pan out. But consider it if you're interested in creating that broader, deeper, or more meaningful impact, and if you're patient enough to see things as they unfold. You might consider this if you're not looking to be on easy street, but if you're looking at the challenge of solving some of the greatest, hardest problems of your lifetime, and if that sounds like a fun new chapter, then you might consider it. And lastly, again, if you are up for a management position in the same industry or discipline that you've been working in for a long time, you might consider being a manager if you would find fulfillment, you would be fulfilled in helping other people recreate some of the same type of career success and fulfillment that you've experienced in your career thus far. Those are just a handful of the reasons that I would suggest you at least consider it. But again, I cannot make that decision for anybody else because that is a very personal, individual decision. So with that said, I appreciate you tuning in to this today. I hope that you've gotten some of the information that'll help you make the decision that you need to make for your own career and for the next stage of your professional life. So until next time, this is Sean signing off. Cheers.